lot of people tell us that we should not openly express our feelings. As a matter of fact, in the workplace, we've always been told to be perfectly logical and rational. But it turns out that suppressing our emotions can have some pretty negative consequences. In this video, I am going to interview a transformational coach who shares with us the importance of being aware of what it is that we're feeling. Because when we're aware of what we're feeling, then we have a choice. We can then respond appropriately instead of being carried away by our emotions. Her name is Candice Velasco. She is a transformational coach who specializes in a field of coaching known as ontological coaching. So let's watch this. So I heard that you're a transformational coach and you use an ontological approach to coaching. And since the word ontological is not something that we hear every day, I was wondering if you can give us an example of that.
Right, sure. So I'm a transformational coach and I work with clients to connect with themselves at a deeper level so that they have a wider world of choices and the ability to act on what they deeply care about most. So in my coaching, I use an ontological approach. And you're absolutely right. It's a big word. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't really know what the word ontological meant before my coaching journey. And if you Google that, you would see that it is the science and study of being. So here we're really looking at being versus doing. And in our society today, and I'm sure you can relate, we spend a lot of time doing, accomplishing more, going from one Zoom meeting after another. And while that's all really important, what we need to do is to take a look at how we're being. Because our way of being has everything to do with how we see the world. And some ways of seeing the world only gives us a few possibilities in life.
Could you give us an example of that, Candice?
Yeah, sure. For example, someone who sees the world as a scary place to live in. And you can imagine that this person only has a few moves. This way of seeing is very constricting. That person may always be on the alert. They may always look over their shoulder. They may not be inclined to take any action that involves any risk to their safety. But someone who sees the world as a world full of opportunities, I can imagine this person would have more options. This person would be able to interact with the world and relate with others in more positive ways. This way of seeing gives him more possibilities in life. So, Arvi, have you ever had a situation where you had an issue and you were stuck and you had a conversation with a friend and that person saw something totally different? That by the end of the conversation, it had you saying, "You're right. I never saw that possibility. I never saw it that way. Thank you for that." And so that is the invitation of ontological coaching. It's really to see differently. Can we see differently with a fresh set of eyes? So new possibilities, new solutions are available for us. This is the challenge. And if we can do that, that's where we really break open and life-changing things happen.
So could you maybe share with us what are some of the benefits that people might get if they go into a coaching session?
Sure, RV. So for one, it's knowing yourself deeply. So my clients have given feedback that through coaching, they are able to reclaim parts of themselves that were once dormant or something they've shut out, or they were able to discover something new about themselves. So for example, I had a client who craved for resilience, and that's a popular word right now. And then discovering he didn't have to look very far and that it was already something that he had within himself and that he just needed to cultivate that. And that kind of shift is powerful when someone is able to see that they don't have to look outside of themselves, that they do have resource, that they do have the capacity to create things for themselves. That's huge. My clients also say that they feel more integrated, that they are more able to access their emotions. They feel less disconnected with themselves. And it's that feeling of being at home with yourself. And finally, it's all about learning to make better choices. So I don't necessarily believe that people intentionally make poor choices. I can't imagine someone waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to make the poorest choices today. So said no one ever. Although sometimes we may regret our decisions and choices, still we make the best choices for ourselves with what we have and what we know, and we do the best we can in the moment. But when we're learning, we're able to know more, and the more we are better able to make the kind of choices that moves us towards that thing that we deeply care about, whether it's finding a job where we can actually be our best self, or inspiring our team, or being a loving mother, or just being a bigger contribution to the world.
So I was wondering, Candice, like, what are the things that people are concerned with nowadays?
Well, each individual is different, and they all have different concerns, particularly based on their life situation. So some are focused on just surviving this pandemic. How do I generate more income? How do I provide for my family? Still others, they want to thrive. How can I be better? Or what's the new skill I can try? And I can relate to that. I am baking with the world. And something I just discovered during COVID. But they're focused on how can I flourish and how can I use this time wisely. And still others, they are concerned with how they can remain relevant in their jobs. It's a new context. Working on a digital platform is distressful for some, especially in a work from home environment. So how can I make myself heard when there are 20 other people in a Zoom call all talking at the same time? How can my ideas be really validated and valued? How can I reach out to my managers when I have some concerns in this kind of setup? And apart from that, they're also concerned about having meaningful relationships, whether it be with their boss, their team, their significant other, their children, or wanting to create a breakthrough in areas of their lives where they feel stuck or where they've given up that anything good can ever happen in that area of their life. But whatever their concern, underneath all that, they're all yearning for something that they don't have yet. They have this great vision of how they want to live their life and the kind of life that they want to live. So a question they sit with is, how do I close the gap between where I am and where I want to go? And how in that process can I actually enjoy the ride?
I heard a lot in that, Candice. So I heard that people are going through different emotions, maybe not just in the pandemic, but with a million things that they're doing on a daily
Right,
basis. And I also
right,
heard you say the word being as opposed to
right.
doing. So could you tell
Yes.
us what the relationship is between being and the emotions that they may be feeling?
When we look at being, we're looking at how we see the world. And so we see the world through language, the body, and our emotions, which is my topic for today. So, for example, when we're happy, we see the world in a certain way. And when we're sad, we also see the world differently. Let's say something happened today. We may have just lost a big client to another competitor. And now we see the world as an unfair place to live in. And then we go home, we see our children who give us the tightest hugs, and all of a sudden, all is right with the world again. So our emotions have a lot to do with how we see the world, which is being.
I see. And well, I know that not a lot of coaches are comfortable dealing with emotions. As a matter of fact, I've heard that some coaching sessions can be cerebral. But as for you, you seem to work with emotions a lot with your clients. I'm wondering, why is this topic very close to your heart? What makes it so
Yeah.
comfortable for you to work with people's emotions?
Well, on a personal level, RV, I used to rely exclusively on my thinking mind. I felt that my body was like a fancy pedestal for my head. So every time I needed to make an important decision, I would say something like, let's set our feelings aside first and let's think about this rationally. So I see this mentality in society in general, this focus on rational thinking. I've heard my clients say, I don't bring my emotions with me to the board meeting, or emotions don't belong in the work setting. And this kind of thinking is so pervasive because we're steeped in it. If we look back at our educational system, we see that we've spent 8 to 10 hours sitting on a chair using our minds to think, problem solve, and analyze. We're used to relying exclusively on our mental faculties, and because of this, we get more and more cut off from our feeling selves. So it was only after my coaching journey, it was only then that I realized that emotions were not that freaky. Because before then, I was scared of feeling certain emotions like sadness, anguish, and grief. I thought that if I felt them, I would be sucked into this black hole and never to return again. So whenever I felt them, I would be quick to bury my emotions. When I felt shame because I was the only one in my group who didn't make it to my high school play, or when I didn't pass a certain university exam, I would tuck those emotions back in very quickly. But as I began practicing feeling my emotions with my coach, because coaches have coaches too sometimes, with myself and with others, I was more able to be with my emotions, even the scary ones. And by actually feeling them, allowing them to surface, holding these emotions with a whole lot of compassion, I realized that I wouldn't self-destruct. They wouldn't eat me alive. But on the contrary, I felt I had more control over my emotions, and it was quite liberating. So by allowing ourselves to feel emotions, that's when we can actually say, I have emotions, but my emotions do not have me. So about 2 years ago, I was part of a witnessing group, and it was really quite special. I've never been in a group quite like it. All we did was to move away from the thinking mind and witness each other articulate the emotions that we were sensing in our bodies in the moment. So every time someone went back into their heads, for example, someone would say, I feel sadness. And I feel this sadness as a light pressure on my chest. And I think it's because. So every time someone said, and I think it's because, that was an indicator for us that this person went back to thinking and reasoning. And so we would gently bring them back into what was happening in their bodies once again. And it was incredibly powerful to be held without judgment. As we were feeling and sensing our emotions, it was incredibly healing for me to be witnessed in this way, not feeling the need to fix anything or go somewhere. I remember walking away from these sessions so much lighter and in peace.
Reading some of the books that are probably being read by executives nowadays, there's this title that I remember, Bringing the Whole Person to Work, from Harvard Business Review, for example.
Right.
And more people are bringing or talking about their emotions. I know that EQ, or emotional intelligence, is also another big thing in the corporate world nowadays. But I was wondering, now that we live in these times where there is a pandemic, do you notice if this is becoming more pronounced? I mean, the people talking about their emotions?
Definitely. I see this pandemic as a sort of collective trauma. So apart from our daily stresses, there's this blanket pressure on everybody called COVID, and it's a lot to process. So at the start, I've heard some friends say that they were initially excited with the work from home environment, but by week 2 or by week 3, they were clamoring for more social and emotional connection. They wanted the opportunity to go back to their offices and to their teams. This pandemic has placed a lot of barriers on how we connect with others in so many ways. We can't see our families. Face-to-face meetings are rare, and it's not so easy to have coffee with a friend. Our connections these days are primarily in the form of Zoom meetings, FaceTime, WhatsApp, phone calls. But in order to have real connection, we need to be more attuned, now more than ever, with our emotions and the emotions of others. As this pandemic has placed so many barriers on how we relate, we must intentionally work on that.
So Candice, I heard you talking about being in touch with our emotions. And I wanted to ask you, from what you've seen, when people do not do that, when they're not in touch with their
Right.
emotions and they continue to live in this cerebral or very mental existence, I mean, what are the consequences, or what are the costs of doing that?
Right. So there are a number of costs, but if I can name 3. So number 1, when we numb our emotions, we are also numbing the emotions that we usually like to feel more of. So emotions like a real joy or real exhilaration. I had a client, and every time she would tell me she was happy, I wouldn't see it in her eyes. She always had a blank stare. Her eyes were kind of dull and glazed over. And so I pointed this out. I told her, I'm hearing your words. You're telling me that you're happy, but I don't see it in your eyes. What do you think about that? And she was really shocked. She didn't realize it. She didn't realize that her emotions and her words were not aligned. And as we worked on this, her big realization was that after she had lost her daughter in an accident, she closed down a big chunk of herself. And it was only when she was able to properly mourn this loss was she able to gain more access to her true joy. Also, I see this a lot in men where they don't give themselves permission to cry. It's in our culture. Men don't cry. So I know we associate crying with sadness and pain, but really there are many reasons why we cry. We cry when something has moved us so deeply. We cry tears of joy, or when we've seen something so beautiful or so awe-inspiring, or when we have an encounter with the divine. So when we choose not to cry, we don't just shut off our sadness, we're also shutting off a whole range of other emotions as well. Number two, when we numb our emotions, we can't feel ourselves. And if we can't feel ourselves, we can't feel others as well. So that's another cost. We lose empathy and real connection. I have a teacher and he always says, to the degree we can't feel ourselves is also to the degree we cannot feel others. As a society, we've become more and more disconnected and we've become more detached with our feelings. This is evident as we see so much violence in the world and the rapid degradation of our environment. Number three, when we numb our emotions, when we sweep them under the rug, they crop up time and time again. So I see this happening in myself and in others when our stored emotions come to the fore when we're triggered. For example, if someone abruptly cuts you in the road while you're driving and you feel so provoked that you feel like you have to blow on your horn continuously or slam your fist on the steering wheel, or when my child interrupts me in a Zoom meeting and I raise my voice louder than I normally would. So in these specific examples, blowing your horn continuously or raising your voice, these reactions were not commensurate to the event. We kind of overreact. These stored emotions, they crop up when we least expect it. So these are the reasons why it's important to be in touch with our emotions.
As I was listening to you, I remember the song "Boys Don't Cry," so that kind of reveals how old I am.
That's right. Oh, I know the song too.
and,
I
and
feel you.
and you mentioned that this is probably even more pronounced in men, although it could happen to women. And I was wondering, is this something that maybe we have learned to do to shut off our emotions?
Definitely. This is something that we have learned more and more as we continue to grow older. So as babies, we were very good at showing emotions. A baby cries when he's hungry, sleepy, when they need to change their diaper. And a baby also laughs and chuckles when they're happy. Emotions was their primary way of communicating. They're all about communicating non-verbally. And at the same time, babies are also good at sensing and feeling the energy and emotions of others. So I have a 5-month-old, and I know that if I'm carrying my baby at 3 in the morning and my mind is going in circles because I'm desperate to put him to sleep, the last thing he's going to do is fall asleep because he's picking up on my energy. So as babies, we all have this great ability to feel, show, and sense emotions. But as we grow older, as our rational minds start to develop, we become less and less attuned to our emotions. And part of this reason is that we've all experienced some form of trauma during childhood. And when I say trauma, I just mean that we've all experienced something that has jarred us in a way, even something as simple as there was a favorite in the family and it wasn't you. Or my parents were so late in picking me up in school one day that I thought they would never come to get me. And as kids, when we experience this kind of trauma, we tend to bury our emotions because it was all just too much. And that in itself is not a bad thing. It was actually very smart because not feeling was our way of surviving. As adults, we've been so used to tucking in our emotions and burying them, even if we no longer need to do that to survive. But like I said, it has a cost.
That's pretty scary. Like when people hide their emotions, all sorts of things get repressed in the process. That's what I heard from you. Even their positive feelings like joy, they probably lose the ability to feel that. And also they lose the ability to read other people's emotions because they have shut off their emotions. So I wanted to look at the flip side now, Candice. Like what happens when people learn to get in touch with their emotions again?
When we are more in touch with our emotions, so I've mentioned a couple of things, so we get to experience quite the opposite of what I mentioned earlier. If we don't numb our emotions, we give ourselves the opportunity to experience true joy. We are able to experience empathy and have these really deep connections with others. We also overreact less, but most importantly, when we are in touch with our emotions, we are also in touch with our most animated self. When we think of things like our life force, when we ask questions like what lights us up, what ignites us, what sustains that flame, to get to the answers of these questions, we need to look at our emotions. Being in touch with our animated self, that is the expression of our best self. That is where our biggest contribution lies. So I have a friend and she loves to cook. And so she gets lost in that pursuit. So even in her dishes, when I taste her food, I feel that energy, that spark of life in her dishes. That's what makes the difference. So just like a portrait painting, it can have spot on symmetry. Every shadow, every detail is perfectly mimicked. But if there's no soul, it falls flat. And you can really sense when a work of art is inspired. That inspired energy literally flies off the canvas.
I was really interested in what you said about this person who was cooking, and you could really tell.
Right,
I
right.
remember there's this movie where I forgot the title, but the person who was baking a wedding cake was
Hmm.
crying while she was baking it because it should have been
Oh,
her who should have gotten married to the guy. And so when the
right.
guests started eating the cake, they felt so sad all of a sudden, and they had no idea why they were
Oh,
feeling so sad.
that's right. That's right. Absolutely. The energy kind of transfers onto the things you do and you create, and people can really sense that and feel that. So, RV, let me ask you, what lights you up? Is there an activity, something you do that lights you up? How does that feel like in your body?
Strangely, one thing that lights me up is when I edit videos. So for
Ah,
publishing on YouTube, I
nice.
enjoy that. I can do that for
You're
days.
welcome. Thank you. So, RV, and how does that feel like in your body?
Well, surprisingly, I can edit continuously for hours. So typically, I hate like sitting for hours, but when I'm editing a video, I don't feel the time passing. So I guess
Right.
it puts me in a space where I completely lose track of time. I mean, that's how I could put it.
Right. So for you, it's losing track of time. Is there a particular place in your body where you feel this energy to continue without having any
Hmm.
regard for time?
I've never thought of that before, but I think I probably would feel it somewhere uh in my head. The funny thing is, so I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm editing a video and I'm
Okay.
putting on some sound or music. I don't plan it, but somehow it happens in such a way that the music is actually perfect for the video. And even some of the events are actually in line with the beat of the video. So all sorts of magical things happen. I guess it's the eye coordination and the ear coordination while that's
Mm,
happening.
right. Right. So RV, we all have that felt sense. So we know how it feels like in our bodies when we are in that state that actually causes us to lose track of time because we get so lost in it. We know how it feels like when we are in that state. So the more we can access that, the more we can practice that, the more we are able to replicate it and bring about those feelings to other things, even other things outside of that specific activity. So can you imagine if we're able to bring our most animated, most present self into our homes, our meetings, our family dinner conversations? Can you imagine the gift that we would be giving the world when we are able to act from this animated place?
I can imagine that life is going to be so much more exciting. it might even feel like a roller coaster ride. There will be times when we're feeling something that we might label as negative, but at the same time, it also opens us up to something that we might label as positive or a heightened desirable emotion. So, which actually makes me wonder now, Candice, like, I know that we're supposed to honor our emotions, that we're supposed to feel it. But what
Right,
about when we're feeling something like rage or, I don't know,
right.
something that we label as negative? Should we always follow our emotions?
That's a very good question, RV. So as Susan David, I'm going to quote her. She's the author of Emotional Agility. She says that emotions are not directives. They do give us information. They tell us about our values and what matters most, but they're not directives. So an exercise which I adapted, it's something I learned from the Strozzi Institute that I give others when they're struggling to make a decision, is to consider three intelligences: the mind, the heart, and the gut when making a decision. So I'd first tell them, bring your attention to your brain, the seat of your cognition, and think from that place. And on the count of three, say your decision out loud when you were thinking from your brain. And then I'll tell them, bring your attention to your heart and really feel from that place. And on the count of three, be ready to say out loud the decision from your heart. Finally, I'll tell them to bring their attention down to their gut and to use their instinct or their gut brain. And once again, on the count of three, say their decision from their gut. Very often, my clients learn that their decisions from the mind, the heart, and the gut, they're not always the same. Their mind may be saying one thing, their emotions something else, and their gut still something else. So which one to follow? So I'll always leave that up to my client. But I would encourage them to make a decision where there is a unity of their mind, heart, and gut. Just because their decisions were initially different, it doesn't mean that they need to stop there. They can learn from that awareness. They can be curious about coming up with a decision that's more aligned. So ultimately, it doesn't feel like they have to be at odds with themselves, you know? But one thing's for sure, when they take into consideration the mind, the heart, and the gut in their decision-making process, they have more awareness of themselves. They're learning more, and ultimately, they would be able to make a decision from a more whole and grounded place.
So, Candice, that is very interesting. What you said about checking in with your brain, your heart, and your gut, because a lot of literature on neuroscience is telling us that your whole body is your brain. And the Heart Math Institute is saying that there's actually more electrical activity going on in the heart than there is in the brain. So in a way, it is part of the brain connected by something like the vagus nerve. I don't know how to pronounce it. So I was wondering, I mean, that is so interesting, Candice, if you had more tips or information that you could share with whoever's watching this video now as to how they can better maybe get in touch with those emotions. What are some practices and best practices rather that they would probably benefit from knowing?
Right. Okay, so number one, I ask my clients, what are their own practices for slowing down and making space for themselves? So tuning into our emotions, that requires us to slow down. So the mental mind runs 200 kilometers per hour, but emotions are different. They run much slower. So I have clients who are very uncomfortable when there's too much silence. They're not used to that. Because when you sit with silence, there's nowhere else to go but inward. And that's when you really start feeling. So, RV, what are your practices for slowing down and creating space for yourself?
Well, ever since the quarantine started in March, I have been meditating every day. And I
Nice.
experienced what you just talked about. Like when I start meditating, it's like thoughts are still racing through my
Mm,
head
right.
at breakneck speed. And then, but after a while, it begins to slow down. So I think meditation has helped me a lot.
Nice.
So how about you, Candice? Like, what are the things that you've been doing so that you can slow down?
For me, I also, just like you, I do it with meditation. I find that just like you, my thoughts run at breakneck speed. So that helps in slowing down for me. Also, another thing is taking a walk around the block. But others do it through just taking a breath when they feel like tensions are rising. Another thing I ask my clients to do is to begin noticing their emotions without judgment, to honor them and to hold them with compassion. So I'm not really into labeling emotions as positive or negative. I feel like emotions just are, and that they tell you something and that they have a voice. I know it's common to quickly judge our emotions, that we shouldn't feel this way, but the truth is we already do. And whatever we're feeling, that's a function of the things we've carried and a whole life that we've lived up to that moment. So that's hard earned, and that deserves to be honored. If we can just give ourselves that permission to be okay with our emotions, whatever emotions they are, the more we can move through them. So, as they say, whatever we resist persists. Another thing is I also encourage my clients to keep an emotional journal. So this is something I highly encourage, to write down the emotions that come up for you on a daily basis. So things like, what is the emotion? Can you give it a texture, a sound, a color? And how does that emotion feel in your body? So it doesn't have to be perfect. Whatever comes up, no need to think about it, as long as it's honest and authentic. And the beauty of writing, as I always say, is that when you read it, when you reread that, you've picked up something new that you haven't before. We can spend years thinking about something, and I've known people who have, including myself, but we're not learning anything new. Another thing I tell my clients is to find that activity that animates you, and how can you connect to that? So during this pandemic, I fell in love with baking. So for me, time stands still when I'm baking. So rather than feeling tired, I feel like it just restores me or gives me fuel. So if you know that activity that enlivens you, carve out the time for it and hold it sacred. Like I said, when we're able to access the feelings that animates us, if we keep returning to this state often enough, we find that we can bring this state of aliveness to other parts of our lives. This animated self is where our biggest gift lies. So accessing this makes a big difference on how we live our lives and also how we touch the lives of others. Lastly, if you feel you need help, especially if you feel you can't or don't want to process your emotions alone, I encourage you to do the research and find the right practitioner for you. Maybe someone who can feel these feelings with you if you feel like you can't do it alone. Take precaution, take care of you, take care of all of you. So you may even want to see the right health professional if you feel you need one before trying anything.
Wow, that is a lot of tips that you just shared with the people who are watching this video, and really thank you for that, Candice. But now I'm curious to find out, like, how did you become interested in all of these?
One of my best friends, who I've known since we were 12, was being coached by an ontological coach. And I remember being fascinated whenever she would talk about her coaching sessions. And I clearly remember she had just come home from a coaching session as she wanted to prepare for this big meeting, because a lot was at stake. There was a big commission to be had, and she was a bit anxious about it. And what struck me was how her coach prepared her for that meeting. So rather than just focusing on what to say or what conversations they would have, the coach also asked questions like, what emotions do you need to bring to this meeting? And I remember my friend said resilience, to fortify herself in that way. And so they worked on those emotions. They worked on cultivating that. And the coach also asked, how about the body? What kind of body do you need to bring to this meeting? And I know that sounds kind of strange, so I don't mean physique, but I just mean how you hold yourself in your body as you are in that meeting. And so she mentioned she wanted to have the posture of dignity. And for her, that meant her feet were flat on the floor, her spine was straight and extended, her chest was expanded, and that her head and chin were up. I just loved how preparing for a meeting, they worked on so many levels. Because when she goes to that meeting, they don't just hear her words, but they take in all of her. So they kind of see or have a sense of the emotions she's having or her body language. So she could go to the meeting and say all the right things, but if they pick up that she's not confident, or that her body is so contracted, she would lose impact. She wouldn't be as effective. So it's important to work on all aspects. But needless to say, she got the deal. But for me, that was what was unique about ontological coaching. I loved it so much that when that same friend mentioned that she was thinking of joining a coach training program, the same program as her coach, I said instantly, I'm in. So she didn't even invite me, but the rest was history. I was also coached by several ontological coaches who have worked with me at the level of emotions, the language, and the body. And it's very powerful when you're able to move in the world where there is alignment between these three things.
Well, that was a very interesting story, Candice. Like, I was listening to the questions that you said the coach asked your friend, such as what emotions do you need to feel in that meeting, and what body do you need to bring or have in that meeting. And I wanted to zoom out a little bit, maybe for a second, because some people might have the notion that when they go to a coach will tell them what to do. Because, you know, from the definition of a coach, maybe in the world of sports, a coach is someone who orders people around and tells them what to do next.
Correct.
But what I'm hearing from you is the coach is trained to ask a lot of questions such that the client can get to really think deeply about these questions and make their own decisions. You've given us a lot of information, a lot of tips. But I wanted to ask you, either in the field of ontological coaching or in the field of coaching, which is not specialized, like any last words that you might have for the people who are watching this video today?
So yes, that's absolutely right. Coaching isn't really about pushing or pulling. You know, when the client feels like they're being pushed one way or another, I feel like that may be a very loose definition of what coaching is. But pure coaching, in a sense, is really believing that your clients have the answers within. And my job is really just to help facilitate that they can draw from within themselves. Because they're really, if you look at it, they're the expert on themselves. They've been with themselves their whole lives, so they would know. So yes, that's right. And just a last word on emotions is that if there's one thing I would like the viewers to walk away with, is the importance of restoring our ability to feel. This day and age, we put a lot of focus on rational thinking, and the more and more we get cut off from our feeling selves. So we pay a high price when we're not attuned to our emotions, as this greatly affects how connected we are with ourselves and the rest of humanity. And so the question I'd like to leave everyone with is, when we numb our emotions, when we choose not to feel, how does this affect the love that we bring to the world?
Wow, this has been a short interview that has been filled with a lot of information, a lot of practical tips that I'm sure they can start applying. So maybe for the benefit of those who would like to get to know more about you, maybe how they can contact you if they want to be coached, could you tell us, Candice, how they can, I don't know, get in touch with you maybe?
Sure, they can reach me at my website, which is CandiceCvelasco.com, or my Facebook page, just Candice Velasco.
So Candice, thank you very much for the time that you spent today to record this. I'm sure that whoever's watching the video has gotten a lot of information that they can start applying. And so thank you very much for sharing what you know about coaching and specifically ontological coaching.
Thank you so much, RV. It was so much fun, this interview, and I wish you a good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.